Welcome to Idea to IPO. Hello, I'm Jennifer Stowell. Idea to IPO has been holding tech startup events in Silicon Valley for many, many years. We launched officially on February 1st, 2010. At that time, we had no members and no events on our calendar. At this stage, we have over 100,000 members among all of our meetup groups all around the world. We have organized, promoted, and produced over 2,559 events. By any standard, by any measure, we are the most active, most prolific startup event organization in the history of Silicon Valley, bar none. We organize venture capital panels, legal workshops, networking events, and more. These days, we are 100% online. Our featured speaker today is Nadia Yaku, one of the top immigration attorneys in Silicon Valley. Ladies and gentlemen, Nadia Yaku. Nadia, take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for this opportunity. I've actually been speaking at Idea to IPO, the gatherings for 7 years now almost. And I always meet wonderful, inspiring, very innovative, creative professionals through these meetings. So I'm excited to be here again. Our last presentation, which we did a few weeks ago, had almost 400 people sign up and nearly 100 people on the actual presentation. So we had a great Q&A session towards the end. So we'll definitely be taking your questions through chat at the end. A little bit about me. I've been practicing immigration law for 20 years now. And my story, my personal family story may resonate with some of you or many of you. My dad and his brothers came in the 70s as international students from Pakistan. My dad's older brother got a job at McDonnell Douglas as an engineer, got sponsored for a green card, naturalized, and sponsored my dad, who after finishing his studies had moved to Singapore for work. And my dad's younger brother married a US citizen, someone he met in college, and got his green card through marriage and got citizenship that way. So I definitely have seen the employment side, the family side, and then I've seen, relatives come through as investors, as physicians. So I feel like I have personally touched on a variety of matters. And then of course, having practiced now for 20 years, I feel like I've seen a lot of these types of cases, and I've actually helped clients literally from the startup to them, raising enough money that they're valued at $1 billion, naturalizing, and it's a very, very rewarding work for me. So I'm excited to share with you my presentation, which is basically visa options for tech professionals, entrepreneurs, and investors. Okay, so let's get started. This is what I'll be talking about. I'll be talking, first of all, about options for you to work as an international student if coming here to study is a consideration. I'll go over then the most common employment-based visas, and I'll talk about the ones that you require an employer for sponsorship, and the ones where you could set up a company and sponsor yourself. I'll give a quick slide on avenues for permanent residence, just to show you how you could eventually transition from an employment-based visa to permanent residence, if that is something you are aiming for. And then I'll talk briefly about common obstacles to getting your visas. And then, given that we are living through a pandemic, I will talk about just all the COVID-related travel restrictions we're currently facing. But before I launch into now the nuts and bolts of my presentation, I wanted to do a quick poll and get a sense of where, hold on, sorry. Let's see. The poll seems to be, let's see here. Well, let's see. I wanted to get a sense of where everyone was from. So I'd love it if you could put in the chat. I can see already, I'm seeing from, wow, Sweden, Nigeria, Brazil, London, Mexico, Kenya, Paris, Toronto, India, Manila, wow, Uganda, Portugal. This is going to be a very, very international bunch. And I'd love for you to also put in what your background is, whether you're an international entrepreneur, an investor. I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal background and what you're interested in for the visa options. So we'll get back to the presentation. Let's go here. So the first and most common pathway, sort of why I started about my family history, is studying in the US. This is a great way to establish a network, get a sense of whether the US is a place where you want to work, grow a business, live permanently. So I think studying in the US is a great first step in determining whether the US is the right landing spot for you. Now, the good thing about when you study in the US is you get work authorization. Normally, you get work authorization when you complete your program. So bachelor's, master's, PhD. There are certain certificate courses that you could do, which would give you work authorization at the end, okay? This is not available if you come to study, or if you come to take some photography classes or filmmaking classes. It's really a university program. You're working towards a degree or a certain kind of certificate program, at the end of which you'll get 1 year of work authorization. And for those of you who are studying a STEM field, so science, technology, engineering, or math, if you're graduating in a STEM field, you actually get an extra 24 months of work authorization. So if you think about it, if you were to come in to do a 1-year master's program or 18 months master's program, you would get 3 years of work authorization. Now, there are some differences in these two types of work authorization, the OPT and the STEM OPT. And the reason I bring these up is because it is about whether you can start your own business or not, right? Because I know this audience, there's a lot of entrepreneurs and investors. And so what I want you to know is that on your OPT, you could start your own business and work for it. You could also join up with other students from your program and co-found a company. But on the STEM OPT, it gets a little bit trickier. You can't just have your own company and be running it. You need someone who could say you are getting a training experience. Okay, so it's not as straightforward as on the OPT. On the OPT, you can freelance, you can start your own company, so long as they're all related to what you study, okay? But you have more flexibility than on the STEM OPT, where in order to qualify for this extra 2 years of studies, you need to be a graduate of a STEM field, and you need to show that you're getting a training experience through an employer. Even if that's your company, you need to show that there's someone else, whether it's someone on your board of directors, a co-founder, who could say you're getting a training experience and there's an employer-employee relationship. Okay, so that's a little bit about studying in the US as a first step towards figuring out whether you want to live and work in the United States. And even though it is expensive, the payoff in terms of networking and opportunities is substantial. There are a couple of restrictions right now that are facing those of you who might be considering this route. And the primary challenge is that a lot of schools are entirely online. And if schools are entirely online, the US is not going to give you a visa to come study here. Okay, now a lot of schools are moving or have been in a hybrid model. All right, and if that's the case, the other challenge you're going to face is that a lot of consulates are just closed. Okay, so they're not even open for routine visa processing. Now, you could always obviously submit a visa application saying you need to get to school, you paid tuition, you need to get started, and that would be an emergency basis to get your student visa. And then the third challenge is if you are from a restricted country. Now, currently we have about 33 countries from which travel to the United States is restricted. So if you're coming from there, you may not get a visa to come to the United States. I'll talk about those 33 countries in a little bit. And there are exceptions if you are coming from the Schengen area, UK, and Ireland. So things are a little chaotic right now because of the pandemic. And so coming into study here might not be super straightforward right now. You know, you'd have to look at making sure your school offers in-person learning, checking to see if your consulate's open for visa processing and can process your visa, and making sure you are not from a restricted country, or if you are, whether you qualify for one of the exceptions. Okay, so that's studying in the United States. Now I'm going to talk about the most common temporary employment-based visas. Okay, and I'm going to start with the most common one, which is called the H-1B visa, and it's for high-skilled workers. Okay, there are
Nadia,
yes.
are you showing slides? They're not showing in the share screen.
Oh, they're not? Hold on. I have been showing slides. Do you see them? Do you see them?
Yep, good to go.
All right, so maybe we'll back up. Sorry, guys, I've been sharing slides. I'll just show you. See, we talked about the studying in the US, the current restrictions, and we're going to share these slides with you after the presentation, so you'll have access to them. And here are the slides where I started: temporary employment-based, H-1B visas, and here are the 4 primary requirements, okay? The 4 requirements to get a H-1B visa for high-skilled workers. Number 1 is that the position must require a bachelor's degree in a particular field. It's not enough that the employer says, I want someone with a college degree. The position must require a degree in a specific field. So the most common scenario in the United States for the H-1B is a software engineer, right? You usually are going, the position requires a bachelor's degree in computer science, software engineering. Sometimes we've been able to get away with physics. So that is your most common H-1B, is a software engineer. And we have to show that there's a bachelor's degree is required. Some of the other common occupations for the H-1B are financial analyst, management analyst, lawyers, doctors, they're engineers, civil engineers, mechanical engineers. So these are the kinds of positions that qualify for the H-1B high-skilled worker visa. The other 3 requirements I'm going to drill down in follow-up slides. The next requirement is that there has to be an employer-employee relationship. So you can't be a freelancer, you can't be an independent contractor. You need to be employed by the company that's going to sponsor you for the H-1B. Okay, so you need an employer to sponsor you for the H-1B visa. The third element is that you have to be paid the higher of the, you have to be basically paid the right wage, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And then there are significant government filing fees that the employer must pay. Okay, so the wage requirements. Let me explain how this works. Basically, the Department of Labor has an online wage library, and I've got a hyperlink to it right here in my presentation for you. So when you get it, you can look at the wage library, and it breaks down by state, county, and occupation. And you look in it and you will see, once you figure out the state, let's say California, figure out county, San Francisco County, and then you look at software engineer, occupational category, it will then give you a screen with 4 levels of wages. You must be at least at the level 1 wage, which is the entry level, and level 4 is the most senior. Okay, so that is called the prevailing wage, and that is something the DOL has calculated. That's the Department of Labor has calculated, and that's what an employer needs to pay you at a minimum. Now, if you're going to go work for a company that actually pays its workers higher salaries for that same job, then you need to be paid that salary. You can't be paid less just because you're a foreign national and the Department of Labor says, well, this is the minimum they need to be paid. They need to pay you as much as they're paying US workers. So whichever is higher. A perfect example is Google or Apple. They pay way above market. Okay. And so if you're going to be a software engineer for Apple, Amazon, Google, you're going to be paid, you should be paid as much as the US workers who are in the same role as you. Okay. Now, the prevailing wage can be an issue for startups, emerging companies, smaller companies. And we can talk about some workarounds there in a little bit. I'm going to get on to the next few issues. And as I mentioned, for the H-1B, you need an employer to sponsor you, okay? So you cannot set up your own company and sponsor yourself if you are a majority shareholder. An exception is if you found a company with other people, you have non-majority shareholder interest, then it's possible for your company to sponsor you for the H-1B. So even if but what you cannot do is set up your own company, sponsor yourself. That is not allowed. You also cannot be a freelancer, as I mentioned earlier. And the government does not like placement companies, staffing companies. So there are a lot of those, and H-1Bs do somehow get approved, but they are more often denied. And there's a lot of pushback from the government. The government does not like if you go work for basically like a staffing company or a company that you're just on their roster and they'll put you on projects. The government really pushes back on these kinds of arrangements. So what they really want to see is that you are an employee of a company, you're on payroll. You don't need to physically be in their office right now. Everyone, in large parts of the country, people are all working remotely. So it's not like you need to be in an office. You can be at a client site, long-term, short-term. Ernst & Young, GE, their auditors are always traveling. This is all okay. So long as there's an employer who pays you, to whom you report, there's things like performance review or bonuses. All of this is part of showing that you have an employer, okay? And the government really wants to see this. It's required. Now, one part of the H-1B process, which can be very hard for smaller companies, emerging companies, companies that aren't used to sponsoring foreign nationals, if you're targeting these kinds of companies, is the government filing fees. They are substantial for the H-1B, and the law requires that the employer must pay them. Okay, so what are these salary requirements? First is a base filing fee of $460. Okay, then we have a $500 fee that the employer must pay. Then we have another fee between $750 if the employer has less than 26 employees. So really small companies, the fees are lower, or $1,500 for employers with 26 or more full-time employees. So you can see the amounts are, between $1,700 to $2,500 just for the H-1B. And if you want a decision quickly on your H-1B, there's an extra $2,500 for what is called premium processing. So if you pay for premium processing, you get a decision in about 15 days. It's required by law under 15 calendar days. Otherwise, you could be waiting anywhere from 3 to 8 months for a decision, okay? Now, the real issue with the H-1B, you know, it's if you're looking for an employer here and you find one and that you have a degree that matches with the position and you're getting the right salary, and there's, you know, they agree to put you on payroll, you have all of that. You have an offer of employment. But the real obstacle or the real challenge with the H-1B is that we have a limit under the law of how many H-1Bs can be granted every year. And this limit is really small. It's quite low. And so what ends up happening is every year at the end of March, there's a lottery, okay? And the first 3 weeks of March, your employer needs to do an online registration for you with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. It's a very basic form. The government filing fee is $10, but it's an online form. They need to register you in the lottery in the first 3 weeks of March. And then the last week of March, the government runs a random lottery and picks out the registrations that basically have been selected, will notify the employer, and then the employer can file the H-1B petition. So what are these limits? It's pretty crazy. It's 65,000 for just, you know, there's a general 65,000. It's actually a little less because if you are from Chile or Singapore, you have a special H-1B visa for you, which takes away 6,800. So 6,800 of these 65,000 are for nationals of Singapore and Chile. So if you're from Singapore or Chile, please put a little message in the chat box. So that really brings us down to about 57,000 something. And then there's 20,000 extra H-1Bs for anyone with a US master's degree. Okay, so the US, really wants to reward those foreign nationals who have finished a master's degree. So there's an extra 20,000 H-1B visas just for them. But you can kind of see that we have about 80,000 H-1Bs available, and every year over 230,000 petitions or registrations are submitted. So there's about a 30% selection chance. For people with a US master's degree, it's a bit higher. It's in the 40%. And for people with anything else, you could have a master's degree from Sweden, Uganda, but if it's not a US master's degree, you're put in with everyone else. So you could have a US bachelor's, a bachelor's from India. All of those are then, that's about a 27 to 30% chance. Okay. Now, one question I get after this presentation is, well, what happens if I have an employer who wants to file after the first 3 weeks of March? Let's say in June, they're unfortunately going to have to wait. They'll have to wait until the following year in the lottery, see if you get selected. If you get selected, they file a petition for you. And once it's approved, the earliest that will be is October 1, you could start work. So you can see the system is really designed for the larger companies that can plan for this kind of timeline, right? Now, there are some organizations that don't have to worry about the annual limit. Okay, so if you're going to go work for a university, or if you're going to go work for a research organization that is nonprofit, these are often tied to universities. They can also be tied to companies. Companies can have, like Xerox has a nonprofit research entity, right? That you could have that. Now, those kinds of organizations, hospitals, they are exempt from the lottery, okay? And so you don't have to worry about that. And of course, once you're into the United States, you want to change your employer, you want to get an extension of H time, you don't have to worry about the lottery anymore, okay? Now, how much can you work? This was what I was saying is if you're going to work for a small company or a startup and they cannot promise you a full-time salary, well, one thing you could do is you could work part-time, and that's okay on the H-1B. It shouldn't be less than 20 hours, and that doesn't seem, realistic at that point. I mean, so you want to show that you're working part-time, 20, 25 hours a week, and that way the salary is calculated at the hourly rate, and you can multiply it by the hours in the week you're going to work. And so that could be a workable salary for a smaller company to pay you. Okay. Now, what you could do is once you have that, you could hold another H-1B. So I've definitely had clients who will have a part-time H-1B with one company and a full-time H-1B with another company, or they'll have two part-time H-1Bs. I've also had clients ask me, well, can I have more than one employer sponsor me for the lottery? Yes, you can. What you cannot do is have them both filing petitions for you if they are both selected. You're going to have to pick one. The government will probably issue a request to you and say, which one are you moving forward with? Okay. Now, just a reminder, your work is tied to the sponsoring employer. So, just if you get an H-1B, that doesn't mean once you're in, you can go work for anyone. You can do whatever you want. You have to work for your sponsoring employer. Okay. Now, this is the question I get after doing these idea to IPO presentations for 7 years. Here's a question I always get. Well, what if I'm working on setting up my own company in the evening while I'm on the H-1B? That's while you're on your H-1B, if you are setting up a company, that is okay, so long as you're not on company payroll, okay? And you continue to comply with the terms of your H-1B. So you shouldn't be not working. One gray zone is, well, can I drive Uber or Lyft at night to make some extra money? And this is a gray zone, okay? And now it's certainly becoming more complicated in California, where Uber drivers and Lyft drivers may become employees. So it's a gray zone. I would just ask you, how badly do you need that extra money, and tell you that, there's a little bit of risk, but, so that's generally a question I get. There's no clear answer on that one. Okay. Insofar as how long you can work, and what about if you have a spouse and children? So here's the deal. You can work 6 years in H-1B time. There's a 6-year limit. But if you are being sponsored for a green card by your employer, you can extend your H-1B time until you get the green card. Okay, because the green card takes a little while to get processed. And so while that's happening, your H can be extended. And then your spouse, your partner, not your partner, you have to be married to them. The US doesn't recognize domestic partnership. So you have to be married. Spouses and children under 21 can join you. Unfortunately, right now, the spouse cannot work. This is something the Biden administration wants to change. They want to give spouses of H-1B workers authorization to work. There is one exception, and that's if you are an H-1B worker who has been sponsored for permanent residence, then your spouse can get work authorization. And that's called it's an H-4 EAD. So your spouse and your children get H-4 status, and you get H-1B status. And what often ends up happening for my H-4 spouses, high-skilled workers tend to marry other high-skilled workers. They're a little frustrated, they're bored, and so they end up actually studying and developing a network that way, and finding an employer who could sponsor them for the H-1B lottery. Okay, so that's the H-1B visa. Right now, you may know this, but up until March 31 of this year, there is a suspension of issuing new H-1Bs by the US consulates. So what that means is, and this may not really apply to this audience, but if you were outside the country, okay, if you were living outside the country on June 24th, 2020, and you were selected in the lottery, your employer filed a petition, it was approved, and you've been waiting to get a visa to come into the United States to work in the H-1B, right now there is a suspension on them until March 31. So our hope is that on March 31, this will end. The Biden administration will not extend this. This was extended from end of December to end of March by the Trump administration on its way out. The Biden administration decided not to fight it and undo it, and so has kept it in place. So we are facing this suspension of H-1B visas until March 31, 2021. There are some exceptions if your work is in the national interest, if your employer is a member of certain trade associations. I've listed them here, okay? These professional associations fought a lawsuit and won, and so if your employer is a member of these, you could move forward with applying for the visa. But the final challenge is also these consulates aren't open. And if they're open, they're operating on a very limited schedule. So there are long waits for visa appointments. So, I think the landscape will change by the end of March, and hopefully we'll see, that those people who got their H-1Bs can start getting their visas and come into the US. Okay. All right. So that's the H-1B visa. Now, let me tell you about this visa, which is a great visa for those of you who are working at companies overseas. Maybe you're even in a family business and you want to bring it to the United States, or you're working for a company that wants to expand to the United States, or you're working for a company that already has a presence in the United States. The visa for you then is the L1 visa for intra-company transferees, okay? So what are the requirements for this visa? You have to be coming to work in a particular role. So it's either executive, manager, or worker with specialized knowledge, okay? And you are eligible to transfer from the overseas office after working there for at least 1 year. And when I say working there for at least 1 year, that means physically there, not being here as a visitor, okay? The time you spend in the US, and this is very common, if you're working here, if you're working, let's say in India, and you're traveling back and forth on a visitor visa, then those days that you spend in the US are counted or subtracted from that 1 year requirement, okay? So you have to show 1 year of physical presence in the company outside the United States, and then you can transfer to the US, okay? Couple of just practical considerations. If you've only worked for the company in, let's say, Russia for 1 year, and you want to transfer to the US entity, if you say you're coming in as a worker of specialized knowledge, the government does ask, how did you acquire this specialized knowledge in just 1 year? Do you truly have this specialized knowledge? So where that works is where language is important. So, German, Japanese, Russian, we could say, well, knowledge of the language is part of their specialized knowledge, okay? But generally, if you've only been working for the company for 1 year and you're not coming in as a manager or executive, but you want to come in as a worker of specialized knowledge, be prepared to explain what expertise you have that you acquired in a year, because the government doesn't believe that anyone can have specialized knowledge after just 1 year with a company. Now, as I was saying, you could come to the US to open a new office, right? And so after working for 1 year, okay, at your company in Russia or India or China, wherever, and you want to expand to the United States, you could get a visa to open a new office. Now, what a lot of people do is they do their due diligence, they do their investigating on a visitor visa. You can get a visitor visa for up to 6 months. You can come on the ESTA if you're an ESTA country for 90 days. But a lot of my clients come in, they kind of check out the land, they check out, if this is where do they want to be? They look at leases for space. And then they do a lot of the groundwork, and then they'll apply for the L1 to stay in the United States and run the business. Okay, so that's the L1 visa. Let me tell you a little bit about the mechanics of how you can get the L and how long you can stay. So you can see the filing fees are less than the H-1B. The H-1B is the most expensive visa. Here you have about almost $1,000 in filing fees. And then if you want a decision quickly, it's $2,500. Okay, that's premium processing. And then insofar as how long you can stay, it's 5 years for workers of specialized knowledge, L1B, or 7 years if you are an executive or a manager. Okay, so 5 and 7 years, those are the amounts of time you can stay in L1 status. Now, I just want to flag that for those of you who are coming to work as an executive or manager, you actually could move to permanent residence. There are green cards for international managers and executives. Okay, so you don't have to worry about the 7-year limit. You actually could transition into permanent residence. It's not available for specialized knowledge workers. And then the good news is that there's work authorization available for your spouse. I'm not sure what's happening here, but so the current restrictions, there are current restrictions on L1 workers. There's a presidential proclamation that is suspending, just like the H-1B workers, no new L1s till March 31st. I also wanted to just bring to your attention that the L1, there is no annual limit, there's no lottery. So at any point in the year, you can apply for the L1, but no new L1s are being allowed into the United States from abroad until the end of March, okay? So now for the J1 visa, this is a visa for people who are living abroad and maybe they don't want to study here because that's just too expensive. And they don't want to maybe even make that long of a commitment. And they want to just get a sense of, working at a startup or maybe working for a company in the US. So a great visa for that is the J1 visa for trainees or interns, okay? And in order to qualify, the J1 for interns allows you to come and work in the US for up to 12 months. You must still be a university student, okay? Or be a recent graduate, as in a year or less. So these are great if you've just finished university and you want to come work for a year. It's a great way to grow your network, get a taste of what it's like to work in the US. It's also a great way for you to see if you want to pursue a degree in the US. A lot of people I know have done a J1, after finishing their studies in, let's say, Italy. And then they said, gosh, after my 1-year internship, I would like to do a master's in the US. And so then they switched to international student. The other option is the trainee visa, and that's 18 months, okay? And you can stay up to 18 months, and you must be a young professional, meaning you've graduated and you've worked for less than 5 years. So again, 18 months. I know a lot of startups offer J1 experiences to people. One thing you want to be careful about when you are getting the J1 is if you are from a country that has a skills list. So this gets technical, and you want to I'm just flagging it to you. You want to make sure that you check to see if you could be subject to a 2-year home residency requirement once you're done with your training experience. So when you're looking at the J1 and you're talking with your employer and the organization through which you get the J1 visa, You need to make sure you understand, well, am I going to have to go back to my home country and spend 2 years there? Because that could happen if you are getting an intern experience or traineeship experience in certain skills that your home country wants. And the larger policy reason for this is to prevent brain drain. Okay, they don't want people coming to the US, getting all these skills, and then just staying here. They want you to go back to your home country and apply what you've learned for 2 years. Okay, so you just want to be careful about the 2-year home residency requirement for the J1. Okay, there is also, just like the H1B, the L1, right now until the end of March, there is a proclamation suspending new J1s. Now, you may know that J1s also covers au pairs, and seasonal workers. So if you work at a camp or work at a hotel, J1s also include all those types of workers. And all of those have been suspended from coming into the United States unless we can show national interest. And if your sponsoring organization is Int'l, that's a J1 organization that fought this proclamation in court and has been able to move forward with getting J1 visas for its members. So, there's a number of obstacles, but what I think Rob and I will, the organizers of Idea to IPO, will talk about is doing another presentation after March 31, when all these proclamations, and these suspensions lift, and we can look at things with more optimism. Okay. All right, so this visa is the e-visa for treaty traders and investors. So the first thing to know, this is not the $1 million green card, which is now 1.8 million. This is not that. This is a different visa. It's an investor visa, and it is only available to nationals of countries with which the US has a treaty. So I have a list of countries. There's a hyperlink in my presentation, and first of all, your country of passport, which wherever if you have a country that you have a passport in, that is the country. If there is a treaty with the United States, then you could apply for an E1 or E2 visa. And what the E1 and E2 visa is for is substantial trade or investment in the United States. So E1 is for trade. And I'll give you a perfect example. Pakistan has a treaty with the United States. There are a lot of traders from Pakistan in textiles, towels, pillows, sheets, these kinds of things. So they have to show that their company in Pakistan is 50% or more owned by Pakistani nationals. I'm just giving you an example as a treaty country. This could be for Canadians or Japanese or Italians, but the company has to be at least 50% owned by nationals of a treaty country, and you have to be either having significant trade with the US, so that's in goods, okay, or you're making an investment in the United States for a real and operating enterprise, okay? So the first question everyone asks is, well, how much money is that? How much do I need to invest? So the law doesn't provide there's no number under the law, under any guidance. The rule is, well, what makes sense for the business? But I will tell you, as a practical matter, the government isn't crazy for amounts under 100,000. Now, can it be done? Absolutely. People do it. You will often see chat forums where people are bragging that, well, I only invested 40,000 or I only invested 60,000. And so there it becomes, the full picture. Like, how much intellectual property has the person brought to it, and how is the company valued? So even if the dollars invested is on the lower side, well, what has the person bring? What other assets are being brought to the table? Okay. And I have clients who, for example, have bought a small gelato shop in San Diego. They're Italian. And so Italy is a treaty country. they bought a gelato shop in San Diego because they wanted to live in Southern California, and they are living in the US on the E2 visa because it's a substantial business. It wasn't a ton of money, but they have US workers working there. They, are growing the gelato shop. They had a business plan saying, we want to expand, maybe buy another one. So that is the E2, okay? So there's no set amount. It has to make sense. I worked for a boutique firm that served a lot of Japanese clients. And so a lot of Japanese would open sake bars or sushi bars, and that would be their investment, okay? Now the E-visa, in terms of just mechanics of how to get it, generally you want to apply at the US consulate where you live, and the visa application fee is $270. What you will be doing is registering your company, whatever you've set up in the United States, you register all those documents with the US consulate where you live, okay? And then they'll review it, and then they'll say, okay, this makes sense that you're going to go and invest in the United States. And so they'll grant you and your dependents visas to come in. You will generally get a 5-year visa, and you'll be allowed to come in for 2 years at a time. Now, some countries, it's a shorter period, like France, they don't get 5 years. So there is some variation on the country, but the general rule is 5 years. And then you come in 2-year increments, and your spouse does get work authorization. So one thing I just want to tell you, you can change your status in the United States. So I have had international students who finished their study, worked on OPT for a year, and then couldn't find an employer to sponsor them for the H-1B lottery. So one of my clients was a Korean, and she decided to pull together a lot of family funds. She had about 100,000 of family savings, and she started her own law firm on the E2. So, that's something that she did. So you can change your status in the United States, but it's better to do it at the consulate because it gives you the ability to travel. Okay, so this visa is actually my favorite visa to work on. It's the O1 visa for individuals of extraordinary ability. When I was at Fragman, the firm where I started my career, I spent 8 years at the world's largest immigration law firm. It's called Fragman, and I was in their New York, Brussels, and San Francisco offices over those 8 years. And we did a lot of movie stars and celebrities. A lot of them have the O1 visa. But you don't need to be a celebrity or a movie star to qualify. You just have to be really good at what you do. And we have to show through evidence that you're really good at what you do. And I often talk to people about this visa. And what I say is you may not be ready now, but you can definitely be ready in a few years if you work hard enough and you create the right opportunities for yourself. So I'm going to talk about the criteria in just one slide, in my next slide. But I want you to know that, I think that these 8 criteria that I'm about to share with you just offer a real roadmap to you insofar as what kinds of ways do you want to show you're really good at what you do. So the O is for people who are just national or internationally recognized in the sciences, arts, education, business, or athletics. Just to let you know, the arts, it's a slightly different standard. I'm not covering it here because it's, our presentation is geared towards tech professionals, entrepreneurs, and investors. And you have to be coming to the US to work in your area of extraordinary ability. And it is tied to your employer. Now, what a lot of artists and movie stars do, they have an agent. So it's their agent who sponsors their O1, okay? It is valid indefinitely. You get it for 3 years, and then you renew every year. There's also a green card for individuals of extraordinary ability. It's just a little bit, they look a little more closely at why you need to stay permanently in the United States, but it's the same criteria. And so what I often do is I have my clients start with the O1. We get them in the US for 3 years. We have them really keep building up that evidence that they're just the top of their field. And then we go for the green card. All right. And your spouse can come, your children can come, but they cannot work. So what's the criteria? There's 8 kinds of evidence the government accepts to show extraordinary ability, and you need to show at least 3. Okay, so I always recommend that we try and show as many as possible. 3 is nice and comfortable, but we want to show as much as we can, even if it's a little skinny, even if it's just one award or one thing under a criteria. So what are the criteria? First is national or international awards in your field. We want to show that there's, it's selective. Second is published material about you or your work. So they like to see, they're going to Google you and they're going to see, well, where all has, this person been covered in the press. I'll be very frank with you. For the O1, there are actually PR firms that will help you. You can pay them a lot of money to get you into articles in TechCrunch, VCB, Business Insider, Entrepreneur, whatever, all those magazines. You can absolutely pay to get placed in some interview, some article there. Okay. They will also want to see, where you're being published. They want to see, well, what's the circulation there? The next is scholarly articles. So that's different from published material about you or your work, right? They want to see scholarly articles that you've written. They're going to be right there on Google Scholar, looking at how many articles you've written, how many citations you've gotten. It's not enough just to have written articles. It's important to show they've been cited. Okay, so what we often do is we get on Google Scholar, we pull all that information, and then we'll even drill down into the citations and say they were cited in Nature magazine. Now, Nature magazine is just a top magazine, for example. That's, we really get into showing how you are recognized. Another element is being asked to judge the work of others in your field. The most conventional way of looking at this is academics who are reviewing journal articles. You're maybe sitting in on a dissertation defense. This is kind of the traditional way of showing that you're asked to judge the work of others, but also all these competitions where you can pitch an idea, right? So if you're being asked to judge a business pitch or a business proposal, that could count. So I have a lot of my young tech entrepreneurs where other entrepreneurs ask them, like, let's say venture capital will routinely ask you to look at ideas being pitched at him. We would say you're being asked to judge the work of others in your field. Okay. Membership in associations that require outstanding achievements. So we want to show that these are selective organizations that in order to join. A very important one is the important and original contributions to your field. Okay. And again, the traditional way of showing this is a patent. We sometimes use conference presentations that you made these original remarks or you made these presentations on original findings you have. It's not enough to say that you helped your company. You took your company to whatever level, because it has to be an industry contribution. And then the next element is a high salary. And that actually, kind of going back into my presentation, that online wage library I was telling you about for H-1Bs, we use that to show, well, level 4 salary is this, and my client makes in excess of that. So you definitely want to be way above level 4. We show tax returns that you earn this money. So a high salary compared to others in your field. I often have consultations with engineers at Apple and Facebook who are making a ton of money, but so are all their colleagues. And so we've got to show what makes them, what makes them stand out. from those engineers. Okay, so it's high salary, we put it in, but USCIS knows that all those guys make a ton of money. And then the last criteria is employment in a critical role for established organizations. Okay, so there's two pieces to that. There's critical role and an established organization. So we oftentimes have to argue, that this organization, it may not be Google or Facebook, but it's definitely established. And then we have to talk about your critical role. Okay, so those are the 8 criteria. Again, I would look at this as a roadmap for your future if you're interested in the O1 of extraordinary ability. I do want to say you do need an employer to sponsor you, but you could set up your own company and sponsor yourself. The key there will then be getting funding to show that you have money to pay yourself and that you are a real business and you have a business plan. But I've definitely done it for clients. They're able to raise a lot of money. Let's say they raise 600,000 or 700,000, and it'll be them and a co-founder, and they will get sponsored by their company. Okay, in O1 classification. So that's the O1. Let me just tell you some visas for specific nationals. I don't have the chat open, but if there are Australians in the group, there's a visa just for Australians. There's an annual limit of 10,500, which is never used up. So you don't have to worry about that limit. There's no lottery. It is just like the H-1B visa, except that it is valid indefinitely. There's no 6-year limit, and it's granted in 2-year increments. Okay, so just like the H-1B, you have to be coming to work in a high skilled role. You have to have a degree that matches. You must be make the prevailing wage. And again, you can't start your own company and then sponsor yourself. So you can't be a controlling shareholder. If I'm more specific, you could start a company with some people, classmates, whatever, but you just can't be a controlling shareholder. Okay. And the good news is if you're coming with your spouse, again, the US does not recognize domestic partnerships. You must be married in order to accompany, to have your dependents accompany you, but he or she will get work authorization. This category is for Canadians and Mexicans. It's called a TN. And this is from our trade agreement between US, Canada, and Mexico. So you must be a national of either Canada or Mexico. If you are a landed immigrant in Canada, like a lawful permanent resident here, you don't qualify. Now, this is different from the H-1B or the E-3 in that you can only come to work in certain occupations. So there's a schedule of occupations, just a list of all the types of jobs that qualify for the TN. And it's quite restrictive, but for software engineers, tech professionals, definitely it's possible. There's a occupation for computer systems analyst. And then the other most common occupational category we use is engineer for our software engineers. Okay. There is no prevailing wage requirement. You don't have to worry about that. So if you're Canadian or Mexican coming to work for a small company or a company that doesn't pay a whole lot, it's not a real issue. It could be an issue in just them understanding, well, why would you come to work for such a small wage? That is the government. But otherwise, there's nothing, you don't have to look at the wage library. And it is employer specific. So you need an employer. So you cannot, again, you can't start your own firm and sponsor yourself for a TN. So a perfect example is a psychologist I was speaking to last week, not for myself, she's a Canadian, and she wants to get a TN to come and practice in the US. And she wanted to start her own firm, like her own solo practice. And unfortunately, she can't do that on the TN. So she's joining a group. And then that's how she's going to get the TN. Okay, so that's the TN. They are valid, again, indefinitely. There's no fixed limit by law, but there's a 3-year stays. You can extend them every 3 years. And at some point, the government does ask, well, are you going to go home? Like, when are you going back? But usually I see the government doing that around year 10, year 11. And if you have enough facts to show, no, I actually, my home base is in Canada, or my home base is in Mexico, the government's usually fine with it. Okay. Now, just a really quick slide on avenues for permanent residence. These are the 5 broad pathways to permanent residence. Okay, so one is employment. And I've touched on those different ways, right? One is if you're an international manager executive. One is if you're an individual of extraordinary ability. Another is if you have an employer who does a test of the labor market. So there's quite a few subcategories under the employment-based route. The other most common route to permanent residence is family. There's a number of relatives categories. The fastest one is if you are married to a US citizen. So when I used to have these presentations in person, I would always encourage the participants. I'm like, okay, so now go out and, go meet someone. But yeah, so marriage to a US citizen is probably the fastest way to permanent residence. There are a number of other categories. My father came in as the brother of a US citizen. That one has a very long wait. But when we're done with this presentation, you can email me and I can sign you up for my client alerts. And one is a client alert that tells you about the different routes to permanent residence, and every month tells you, where the government is working on which cases, because all these categories have waiting periods. They have backlogs. The third most common way is the diversity visa lottery. You guys probably know about it. It's the annual green card lottery. It's an online registration. It's usually in October. People always ask me, oh, if I sign up for that, does it mean I've shown immigrant intent? No, they get 15 million registrations for 50,000 green cards. They give 50,000 green cards every year. Last year, this was frozen due to COVID and due to the presidential Trump's proclamations. The Biden administration is actually trying to increase the number to 85,000. So just to let you know, the green card lottery is for countries where we don't have a lot of immigrants from. So if you are from, every year they'll release a list of countries from which we have a lot of immigrants. And so you cannot apply for the green card lottery if you're from like Canada, Mexico, India, China. These are countries that are heavily represented in the United States. And the purpose of this program is to bring in immigrants from other parts of the world, which we just don't have as many of, okay? And that's why it's called diversity visa lottery. The fourth way is asylum. And that is if you are afraid, really afraid to go back to your home country, whether it's your religion, your race, your political opinion, your nationality, or membership in a particular social group. If you are afraid to go back to your home country, asylum may be a route for you. I do some of these cases. I've done them for people who are, who are gay and they're afraid to go home. I've done one for a woman who's bisexual and she's afraid. She's raised in a strict Chechnyan Muslim family, very afraid for her life. So that is another way. It's not exactly for, tech entrepreneurs or tech professionals or investors, but, you may be someone who, in addition to being a superstar professionally, have some real reasons you're afraid to go home, okay? And then the last is the investment-based green card, which is 1.8 million. If you invest $1.8 million in the United States, and that's money coming from overseas, not raising it in the United States, but money from overseas that you're bringing into the United States, okay? And you're creating 10 jobs for US workers, you could qualify for this green card. It's the EB-5 green card. And you can actually also invest half of that amount if you are investing in an economically disadvantaged area. So there are areas that are very economically depressed. And so half of that amount will carry, a lot of weight there. And it's to attract investment in those areas where people traditionally don't want to invest in. Okay. And a common question I get is, well, what if I buy an apartment building? I get this question all the time. What if I buy an apartment building? Could I get the E2? Could I apply for the EB5? Those are considered passive. Those are passive investments. And what the government wants to see is that you are creating a business with all these, which will result in all sorts of spending. Okay. Now, from permanent residence, the next question is, well, what's the pathway to citizenship from permanent residence? And you can obtain citizenship 5 years after getting permanent residence. That's generally the rule. And if you're a spouse of a US citizen, as I mentioned, it's the fastest way. If you are married to a US citizen who sponsored you for a green card and you're still married after 3 years, you can apply for citizenship based on that marriage. So I've actually worked with clients from when they met on a dating app all the way to citizenship based on that marriage. Okay. So unfortunately, right now, there is a suspension on immigrant visas. So for those of you who are outside the country, going through the permanent residence process from outside, that is, you're being sponsored by someone in the United States, whether it's family or employer, or you were selected in the lottery. Right now, the Trump administration since last year has put a hold on any immigrant visas, which essentially means you would enter the United States as a permanent resident. All of those have been suspended until the end of March this year. Okay, so we've had almost a year where people have been waiting to come to the United States and they have not been allowed to move forward. So this includes parents of US citizens, adult children of US citizens, spouses and children of green card holders, individuals selected in the green card lottery, employment-based visas, and other immigrant visas. So right now there's a hold on these until end of March. Here are just some common obstacles to getting a visa because, life happens, we make mistakes. And so there can be certain things that could make it harder for you to get a visa. Number one, as I was talking about when I was discussing the J1 slides for interns and trainees, you want to be careful about the 2-year home residency requirement. You don't know how many times I have talked to someone who is just completely shocked and surprised that they have to do this. They did not look at the paperwork. They did not know that such a thing exists. They just signed off on their J1 program. And at the end of it, they were married. They had a US citizen spouse, or they had an employer wanting to sponsor them for the H. Didn't matter. They had to go home and spend 2 years in their country. Okay, so that is a problem. That can be a problem from the J1 to another visa. Another is if you've stayed in the US for more than 180 days, then you have a bar to coming back. So if you've got prior issues with your stays in the United States, you've been this sometimes happens where someone will come as a visitor and they will be put on a plane and returned home. If you have something like that, these things can delay or create problems for you in the future. It's not to say they can't be overcome. They can, but it's just to say you need to be prepared to, first of all, explain that to your immigration lawyer or your employer or your spouse, and then think of ways to, explain that in a way that processing speeds up, okay? And related to that is a bad memory. If you've been arrested or convicted of an offense, and you mark that you've never been arrested or convicted, and you go in for your fingerprints for the visa interview and it shows up, you're going to get dinged with fraud. So not only will they say, hey, what's this reckless driving charge? But they're going to say, why did you say you don't have anything? So we want to be careful about not saying, I never had anything, okay? And I know some countries expunge, what that means is they erase your criminal record. You still want to talk to a lawyer in the US about how could that work? Okay. And then again, as I was saying, if you've been arrested or convicted anywhere in the world, and especially in the US, you want to be careful I actually am going to be speaking to someone, after this presentation. She's been charged with tax fraud. And so she's really worried about what does she say she did or didn't do, because how is this going to affect her green card, right? So you want to be, if you've been arrested or charged or convicted, you have to be ready to talk about it with your lawyer. You don't need to tell your employer right away. Maybe you want to talk about it with a lawyer first, and then see how it needs to be shared on a visa application or in a petition. Okay, so now I just want to close with, we are in a global pandemic, and I'm sorry about this yellow squiggle. I'm not sure where this came from. But there are 32 countries from which travel to the US is restricted. Okay, and those are Brazil, China, Iran, the 26 states of the European Schengen area, the UK, Republic of Ireland, and South Africa, which was just recently added. Okay, now the workaround is you can go spend, if you are in one of these countries and you want to come to the US, the workaround is to spend 14 days in a non-restricted country. Okay, now the problem is Canada is not letting people in to do that. Mexico is, but its COVID rates are high. Some people are going to Dubai. People are going to places. The problem is when it comes to international travel, things are changing so fast, and due to the pandemic, things are changing. So while this was early on a strategy people used to go spend 14 days in a non-restricted country and then come to the US, I think that is getting harder to do because so many countries are not letting travelers in. Okay, but those are the countries from which travel is not being allowed directly into the US, unless, of course, there are a certain list of exemptions. I mean, if you are the spouse of a US citizen, or if you are a green card holder, or if you're coming to work in the national interest, there are some exceptions, but they're pretty narrow. Okay, so those are COVID-related restrictions right now. And unfortunately, the Biden administration doesn't seem to be in any rush to lift these right now because the COVID rates in the US are so high. Now we are seeing things improving, but right now the administration hasn't given any signal as to when these could lift. Okay, on the contrary, they just added South Africa. So that's where we are right now on the travel restrictions due to COVID. Now, I wanted to tell you, after doing these presentations, and I actually speak to a lot of international students, and at Stanford, and with Berkeley and Santa Clara and Georgetown. I mean, I speak at a whole bunch of universities, and I've started to see some certain patterns in questions and what people want to understand more. So I created a podcast series, and I've got about 12 episodes. And the most popular one actually is with a recruiter of 30 years for tech companies. That's where she's focused. She has worked for a variety of tech companies for the last 30 years as a recruiter. And I interviewed her to find out, well, what makes a candidate stand out to you if they're a foreign national? How can a foreign national grab your attention? How can they overcome any visa sponsorship issues? So that's my most popular podcast. I also have one with an asylum officer. I have one with an immigration judge. I have one with a business lawyer who talks about things you want to keep in mind if you're setting up a business and how to set yourself up for growth. So, just if you're more of a person who learns from listening, you could listen to the podcasts and get some more information that way. Otherwise, I would love for you to stay in touch with me. It's my team. We are based in Oakland, California, but we are all, believe it or not, immigrants. And so we would, love to stay in touch. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I have noticed while I'm presenting, I keep getting the LinkedIn invitations, which is wonderful. Thank you for doing that. So please send me the invitations, and also I will get your email addresses and I will send my slides to you. And I'm happy to add you to my email list So you can get client alerts on these travel restrictions and the H-1B lottery and just developments on immigration law. So I think I'm done on that front, and we can hopefully open it up to questions. Let's see. I'm going to stop the share now, and that way I can also see the chat questions with you. 1 second. All right. So last time, as I mentioned, we had a very long chat. We had a very long Q&A session, and I'm excited for that. We got lots of great messages. And so I'm not sure, Rob, do you want me to just go through the questions and start answering them? Then I'll, hold on. Okay. Wow, we have so many interesting. So one question I have, is that not a conflict of interest if I have a stake at the business employing me? And there, from an immigration perspective, if you are not a majority shareholder, then you can be, if you're not a majority shareholder, then you can be sponsored for a visa. There could be other conflicts of interest outside of immigration, but from an immigration perspective, they want to make sure that there's an employer-employee relationship, which is usually established by a minority shareholder interest. If you own the business, that they're paying you the right wage, that the position requires someone with a certain degree. So that's from the immigration perspective. Okay. All right, 1 second. All right, just a second. Looking, there are still 95 messages to working through. There's lots of great stuff on LinkedIn for people who are looking to grow their connections and communities. Oh, so one question is, are these once-off or recurring fees? So you have to file them with the petition, and then there are filing fees to be filed at the extension stage. So they're once-off insofar as you file them at each stage of the petition. Are the universities and R&D firms, CAP-exempt orgs, also bound to pay the prevailing wage? Yes, they are. You can always use alternative wage surveys. Those are expensive, and there's a number of requirements that they need to meet to satisfy the Department of Labor, but oftentimes what they'll do is use an alternative wage survey, not the Department of Labor's wage library. What is the process of E2 visa? The process is what I had explained is you go into the consulate, you have to register your company at the US consulate to pick up the E2 visa. You have to set up a real business. In the United States, there's a business plan. You want to maybe, right now with COVID, I don't think anyone's requiring an office space, but you need to have bank accounts, show that you're spending money on maybe getting a website done, etc. So you pull all of that together, and then you apply at the US consulate. You show them all that material, and you say, I have this investment that I've created in the United States, and I want a visa to go in and oversee it. Or you could change your status from within the United States and file it with the with the USCIS. If you own a company in Canada and want to expand to the US, is this visa applicable? I'm not sure which visa, but you could certainly use the L1 for that if you want to expand, and if you keep your Canadian entity very much operating in Canada, you could basically have an international community between Canada and the US. So there's a question about circumstances under which spouses of H-1B workers can work, and that is if the H-1B worker has been sponsored for permanent residence and has the I-140 approved. So that's the second step in the permanent residence process. If that's been approved, they can apply for their employment authorization document. Okay. Out of the criteria for recognizable articles, news, etc., do digital media and forums like TechCrunch, which are quite famous, hold water? Yeah, they do. They just want to see what we do is we explain to the government what this digital media and forums are, and we do include a little blurb about how many subscribers they have or how much traffic they get to their website. We show that in saying the press coverage is real. It's not just, you know, my blog, for example. it's a website that gets a lot of traffic, right? Thank you. This is 401 visa. Yeah. Haha. Paying TechCrunch. I know. I agree, Carlos. It does feel like cheating, but it's also been eye-opening for me to see that, you know, you can kind of pay for a lot of things. Okay. There is no specific visa for Spain, unfortunately. Yes, there was a commitment by the Biden administration to clear those long-standing backlogs. This is definitely something they'd like to do. There are certain ways in which they're proposing to do that. Some of them are more controversial than others. You know, you have to keep in mind, this is a migration policy. It's about demographics. There are people in America who want America to look a certain way, and there are other people who are fine with it looking another way. And so to keep the racial composition in a way that works for everyone is, you know, they're trying to figure out how to clear those backlogs without dramatically changing the racial composition of this country. Okay. Massive information there. Thank you. Okay, great. Aw, you guys, thank you. So yes, you're absolutely right, Harris. The impression I'm getting from this presentation is that all working visas, H-1B, L, O, TN, J-1, have an actual path towards U.S. permanent residence without going through the marriage route. Obviously, it's an odyssey. That's a great way to describe it and all that. But it sounds like that's, yes, if marriage to an American happens, then great. That's the fastest and best route. But going through any of the other paths is supposed to theoretically work too. Is that accurate? Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. I'm very much a believer in our migration system. I mean, you know, I explained to you how my family has done it, very much so. We had one uncle who got married to a U.S. citizen, but everybody else came through work and family, like siblings. My one cousin, just to give you, was a physician in, so there's a whole program for physicians who work in underserved areas. He worked there. He got his green card. I had another cousin who was a physician who came. He went to Chicago. He was subject to the 2-year home residency requirement because he came as a trainee physician from Pakistan, and he overcame that 2-year home residency requirement because his U.S. citizen child was born deaf and mute. So he explained that taking this U.S. citizen child back to Pakistan would be an extreme hardship on the child. And the government said yes. And my cousin got to stay and got his green card too. So definitely, you're absolutely right. Marriage is there are many, many ways to getting permanent residence in the United States. Okay. Okay. So I keep getting this question. If you own a company in Canada and want to expand to US, is this visa applicable? Could you let me know which I'm going to scroll down. Oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening. I still have 100+ messages, chat messages. But here's a really good question, and I'm so glad you brought it up, Kevin. Is there a requirement that employers show that they have tried to hire U.S. applicants before recruiting a foreign national? Great question. For the temporary visas, no. No, no, no. You do not need to show any kind of test of the labor market for any of these visas that I've talked about. However, for a green card, there's there's a couple of employment-based green cards where you have to test the labor market and show there are no U.S. workers who are able, willing, who are willing, able, and qualified for the position. So that is only the permanent residence route. Okay. What are the requirements for asylum? What restrictions are there for an asylum to stay in the US? So for asylum, you have to show that you are fearing persecution in your home country on account of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in particular social groups. So it's got to be one of these 5 grounds, and you are afraid of being persecuted. So this is a lot of harm that you're afraid of. It's not that it's hard for you. It's that you're going to be hurt and targeted for one of these 5 reasons. And you have to apply for asylum within a year of being in the United States. And let's say you're here, and this does happen. Let's say you're here as a student and you decide to convert to Christianity, or you decide that you're actually gay and you're afraid to go back to your home country. So then the 1-year clock starts ticking when your status expires. Okay, so it's either you have to apply within 1 year of entering the United States, or as soon as possible after your status expires. Okay. But I would also encourage you to listen to my podcast with the asylum officer. So she's a former asylum officer, and now she's an asylum lawyer. And I interviewed her, and it's a really great conversation on the requirements for asylum and how to prepare yourself for your asylum interview. So I think you'll find that helpful. Do I support EB-1A application? Oh, yes, definitely. We've gotten a lot of those approved. In terms of filing for the E3 and H-1B from the employer's perspective, is it the same on their side in terms of filing fees? No, it's much less for the E3. The H-1B has much more fees than the E3 does. Yeah. So this is, so there's a question from Laurence. I am trying to book a DS-160 appointment for a non-immigrant visa, E3, those are for Australians, and usually book Barbados, yep, but no appointment, only emergency. Any suggestions, which one would be the quickest? As I want to start work ASAP. Totally understand. Laurence, I don't know if you're in the US, but there was actually an article on this, that Australians are effectively stuck. You cannot, the consulates, if you are not in Australia, you're facing an expensive quarantine if you go back to Australia. And flights are very expensive right now. Essentially, I've looked at consulates around the world for my clients who are Australian here to pick up their E3 visas, and we're not finding either consulates are not open or they're not allowing travelers in. Okay, so unfortunately, I don't have any suggestions right now. Even Mexico says that you can't apply there. You have to be a resident of Mexico. So it seems to me that you either have to go back to Australia, which I know is very costly right now and kind of a nightmare, or you apply to change your status to E3 and then wait it out. But we're looking at a 5 to 7 month wait. So that doesn't help with your starting work ASAP. So it is a very tough situation right now for E3s. Okay, Sunny has 3 questions. Is CPT, okay, one second. E2 visa, is it advantageous with E2 visa than other visa types for getting green card faster? So you can't actually get a green card from the E2 visa. It is a non-immigrant intent visa. The other, so it does not help you with getting that. So you're on the F1 visa, CPT during study period. Is it possible to change to H1B while doing CPT? Yes, it is. If we do study online only due to COVID and the university is not having hybrid, then will it be eligible for OPT after the course completion? This is a good question. Are you studying in the US? This is a really good question. And I think it's not clear to me right now. This is something for universities and it's not my area. I don't know the answer to that one. Because this is usually handled by universities and they're actually handled by a particular area of law. So no, unfortunately, I don't know if you will get OPT after the course completion. Oh, here's a very good question from Sunny. Green card queues are based on citizenship or country of birth. So this surprises people. It's country of birth. So you could be an Indian national, and in the backlogs for Indian nationals are very substantial. But let's say you're an Indian born in Bahrain or in Singapore, then you're not treated like an Indian. You are suddenly, you're not in the very backlogged category. And same with Chinese who have German passports. But if your country of birth is China, you are treated like a Chinese national. So, right. Hi, Nadia. I'm already in NV. I'm assuming that's Nevada. I stayed after having my return flight canceled last April. Since being here, I've been offered a sponsorship by a company in my line of work. Congratulations. My problem is that I came in on a visa waiver from the UK, which has expired. Oh, yes. Unfortunately, you cannot change your status from the visa waiver program, which if you've come in on the ESTA and they've allowed you to extend because of COVID and travel issues, but you're not going to be able to change your status from ESTA to a work visa. You will need to leave the US and pick up that visa. I'm not sure what visa they're going to be offering you because the H-1B, you have to go through the lottery. It could be that they are an E2 company. But you, unfortunately, insofar as your immediate question, you won't be able to change your visa. Okay, so here's a good question. If one is a majority shareholder in a company in Canada, what are the visa options available? Based on your webinar, I gather L2, E2 can apply. That's exactly right. Will you give a discount coupon to participants of this session? So what I do offer are my slides. As you know, this presentation, there was no fee for the presentation. So I do charge a consultation fee for if you'd like to have an individualized conversation with me about your specific visa options. I would like to know more about asylum combined with an opportunity to open a beauty business in which I can employ two from the beginning. So, opening a beauty business, I unfortunately would not know too much about it. It depends on what state you want to open in. Each state is slightly different. The good news is if you're opening your business, you don't need work authorization because you're not going to work for someone, you're working for yourself. And you can't put yourself on payroll because that would be working. So one way to avoid, well, it's a good scenario, but I think insofar as applying for asylum, I would refer you to my podcast, and that is with a former asylum officer, and that will talk you through the whole process for applying for asylum. Okay, I got a really good question about, are there any restrictions if someone has had problems with credit scores or credit reports? This is going to be an issue if you are applying for a green card, permanent residence. Right now, there is a form called I-944, Declaration of Self-Sufficiency. If you are applying for permanent residence, you need to complete this form. And one of the questions is, what is your credit score? And they ask you to include your credit report. Now, we haven't heard, this is a pretty new form, and it is being challenged in court. There are a lot of people who think this form is elitist. Not everyone has a great credit score. Not everyone has a college degree. Not everyone is rich, and so they feel that the kinds of questions asked on this 18-page form about you is very elitist, and it's not fair to all kinds of immigrants. Okay, so it's possible that the credit score question and the form in which it's asked may not be required at some point, but for now we have to file this form, and in the form you are going to be asked, what's your credit score? You have to include your credit report. It's not clear that that means you'll get denied, but you probably should be ready to explain why you have a poor credit score and explain what assets you have now. How you can in general, the bigger picture of you is one of being someone who will not need to go on public benefits. Okay. Is it better to wait and apply for H-1B later due to COVID-19 issues and Trump's existing policy, or apply ASAP? So if you mean in the H-1B lottery, oh yeah, I think you need to apply in March. It's opening on March 9th, the 3-week window. It's opening on March 9th. So I would encourage you to get into the lottery. Insofar, yeah, I mean, if you're in the United, yes, I think that insofar as the lottery goes, you should apply right away. So here's another question. I am on an H-1B visa at the moment, and I've incorporated my company here. As you suggested, I am fine unless I'm not on the payroll of my company. If I'm able to raise enough money and employ a few people from US and abroad, can that be seen as a criteria to show extraordinary ability for the O-1 visa? Also, how can I transfer my H-1B to my company, as my end goal is to be able to raise money and work on my tech startup? May it be under an O-1 visa or H-1B visa? So this is a really good question. If you're able to raise money and employ some people, I think the raising of the money, what I frame it as, is an award, okay, from venture capitalists. And I think that could be part of a larger O-1 application. You still have to show 3 of 8 criteria, right? So it's not enough to just raise money and employ US workers, but it's definitely a great fact, and you're on track. Insofar as how can you transfer your H-1B to your startup, you've got to have a minority shareholder interest. You should have a board of directors who could push you out. So from an immigration perspective, that's what you need to do. But I would say from a business perspective, you want to be careful in diluting your ownership interest. You want to be careful to make yourself vulnerable. So you want to make sure you're working with people you trust, that, even though you are on paper, you're a minority shareholder, they have the capability to push you out, they have the capability to terminate you. That's a way you could transfer your current age to your age. Again, the key is to be a minority shareholder in that company, okay? But good luck with your company. I mean, that's great. If you can raise the money and get that going. But also the other thing to keep in mind is you want to make sure that you continue to do the work on your H-1B for which you have been currently sponsored. Okay, so we're a profitable business in Canada, and I'm a majority shareholder. We have clients in the US as well. So as you mentioned, L1 will hold. Can you please explain how long this process takes? So what you need to, I don't know if the L1 will hold. I think you have clients in the US. It certainly justifies expanding into the US. You will need to, incorporate a business in the US that is legally related to your Canadian entity. You'll need to have a bank account and money put in there so that you can pay staff or yourself if you're coming to oversee. The other question is how many, this is a very fact specific question. We would have to look at how many people are in Canada, because if it's just like 2 or 3 people, you're not going to get an L1 to transfer to the US. If it's like 40 people, 30 people, sure, it makes sense. You have to think of this as this is an international company. And it doesn't make, I talked with some young tech entrepreneurs, 4 of them who created a great product in New Zealand, and they wanted to create an office in the US. And they wanted to transfer 3 of the 4 there. And I said, that's just not going to work. That's not an international company transferring its people. It's just 4 people setting up a company so that 3 people can transfer over. And that's not going to work under immigration law. So I think the other option could be for you to create an investment entity in the US because you're Canadian, and serve your clients that way. But I think this may be better for a consultation, so we can really look at your business in Canada, see how strong it is, see that a US operation is justified, see that a transfer of someone from Canada is warranted. I think that might be more appropriate than like a 2-3 minute Q&A. If I had an L1 visa and I got a Social Security in 2000, could I apply for a job? If I had an L1 visa and you got a Social Security number, could I apply for a job? I'm from Mexico, a civil engineer. NAFTA would be the best option for me. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If you're an engineer, a TN, if you found an employer who needs an engineer, then I think that would be the best way to go. You are going to need an employer to sponsor you for a visa. Having a Social Security number isn't enough to authorize you to work. You need an employer to sponsor you. But the good news for you is that you have an occupation and a nationality that makes it easy to get a visa. Oh, great question. For the treaty visa, do you need to incorporate a company in the treaty country? Nope, you do not. Can you share your details to reach out? Here, maybe I'll do this again. I'll share my screen. Oh, that means I lost the chat. Okay, so my contact details are there. If you just look me up, Nadia Yacoub Law, my website should pop up and you can email me. The last time I did this presentation, unfortunately, when I sent out all my slides, it was to about almost 400 people. I emailed all my slides out, and a lot of them, the responses came back into spam. So it took me a minute to respond to everyone. I took a little bit longer. But yeah, you can just, find me online, and my contact details are there. And you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I don't think there's very many Nadia Yacoubs. Okay, so let's see here. Is it possible that my country, Hungary, is accidentally left off the treaty country list, but very similar? No, unfortunately, Hungary, they're trying to, it's not a Schengen area. I understand that's frustrating, but it's not an accident. Let's see. No, unfortunately, it is not an accident. Okay, let's see. What is the option for someone who wants to use the L1, E1, E2 to work in the US? Can one outsource oneself to clients via the company machinery? Yeah, if you set up an E2, yes, I don't think the L1 is so easy unless your Canadian entity is robust. But what I would recommend you do is, yeah, you could set up an entity, an E2. You're going to have to invest money in that entity. So if your objective is to find a stream of income, that's great. But you also need to invest money into the US. And so then the question becomes how much? And, you know, as I was saying, it doesn't sound like if you're starting a services business, you know, probably you don't need to do more than 100,000, but you probably want to do 80, 100,000, invest in the US, set up a business. You don't have to spend all that money, but that money needs to be transferred to a bank account in the US. And then you can show a business plan that, oh, I offer these services, and then you can engage your firm that you've set up in the US with US clients. So it's not you they're engaging directly, they're engaging your firm. And then that's a way to make money. And, you know, I knew a Swiss woman who set up her own, she was a personal trainer. She was a phenomenal personal trainer, and she actually created an E2 entity. This was, you know, back in the day when it was a little more relaxed, but she created this whole brand around herself, and then she found people to work for her, and then she had this whole personal fitness business. She didn't invest a ton of money, but she invested enough, and she had a very good business plan to explain her fitness brand. So, you know, it is possible. And then they all engaged her fitness company that she was running. Okay. So I'm a web developer and computer science teacher in Saudi Arabia. What is the option for me to work in the USA? I think it sounds like to me the best option is for you to find an employer who would sponsor you for the H-1B lottery. I don't know how long you've been teaching or how old you are, but the other option could be a J1 trainee visa. If you have not been working for more than 5 years since graduating from college or your master's program, you could come and work as a trainee for 18 months. For all these opportunities, you need an employer who could sponsor you. So I would say for you, you know, there's 3 options. One, you work for an international company for a year, transfer over to the US if they have a US entity. Another is to find a school. Maybe there's a school, you know, that's an Arabic school, and they are looking for teachers. See if they will sponsor you in the lottery, H-1B lottery. And then if you're a young professional, I would say a J1. So those would be your 3 options. So yeah, for the musician and visual artist who's been offered an artist in residence position with a performance venue, wow, that sounds amazing. What I recommend is, you know, but you still cannot change your status. It's just in the regulations. Anyone who enters in ESTA cannot change their status. The only exception to that rule is if you marry a US citizen. So otherwise, you need to leave the country. Now, it may be that they will get you it could be an O1 for artists. There are other visas, you know, that maybe they found something for you. But an artist in residence position, it could be a J1. But regardless of what visa ultimately is a match with your situation, you are not going to be able to change your status from within the US. Sorry, what are the rules for remote work? I'd like to come for an MSc software engineering and 3 years OPT, great, with the STEM extension. Hopefully I'll then get a sponsor for H-1B. Can I work remotely full-time whilst on F1? So, you know, that is a good question. Working remotely, for who? If it's for a US employer full-time, no, because you'd need work authorization, and they're not going to give you work authorization to work full-time throughout all your studies. So then if you're saying, oh, I'm going to work remotely for a company in my home country, you know, to do that full-time while studying, that you could run into some problems, because they would say you're not complying with the terms of your status. You're supposed to be here to study, not work remotely. Now, you know, I totally understand studying in the United States is extremely expensive. So if you're able to do a little bit of work for a company overseas, just freelancing remotely to make a little money, you know, I think anybody would understand that. But I mean, to do it full time, that doesn't, you know, could you do it? You probably could get away with it. You'd want to be very careful. You want to be very careful, you know, about how you present it on forms. So you just want, that's a situation where you want to be careful. But I appreciate how hard work, it sounds like you're very hardworking, and to do full-time work, like a freelance basis, while doing a master's program, you know, that we just want to make sure that you are complying with the terms of your student status. Okay. So here's a question. Does your firm make employment referrals? My company does diversity recruiting, and our clients are increasingly interested in H-1B candidates. I haven't made any referrals. I haven't, but you know, I talk to a lot of international students, so I could certainly refer international students, but those aren't H-1B candidates. Yeah, you can contact me about that. I haven't been doing that. Okay, so someone here has an option for working in Barbados on their visa program while we're waiting the consulate appointment. That's great. That sounds like a nice way to wait something out. Thank you. Are tourist visas open at the moment? I think the problem, if you have a tourist visa, so there's several things going on here. Number one is, if you already have a 10-year visa sticker in your passport, you could travel to the US, but it depends on where you're coming from, right? So if you're coming from one of the 32, remember here, if you're coming, okay, now those yellow squiggles are gone. I don't know what that was about, but if you're coming from one of these 32 countries, then you know, you can't come in, even if you have a tourist visa, or like from South Africa or Brazil or China. And insofar as if you don't have that visa sticker, then you have to pick up the visa at the US consulate, and most of those are not open other than for emergency appointments. So unless you have urgent needs to visit the United States, I don't know if you'll be able to get a new visa, a new visitor visa right now. Okay. Okay, I've heard about contract marriages being a possible route. How feasible or illegal is this? It's totally illegal. I wouldn't do it, but people do. You want to be very careful. You want to be very careful. They have a whole marriage fraud unit, and they will look on they will look on Facebook, social media, Twitter. You have to be careful. So you know, I will say to you, I mean, it is totally illegal under the law. And I want to also tell you, if you do it, and if they find out, the government finds out, you are never allowed to get a green card to the United States. So I know people where they came in, they married someone, you know, where they paid them, and then that person, they bombed the interview. The person, the government said, oh, you've committed marriage fraud, and then they didn't remove them. They didn't deport them. So this person just stayed and was a construction worker. Then he met a US citizen he really did love, had a baby with her, wanted to get married, but she cannot sponsor him. And it's because he has been found to have committed marriage fraud. And so now he's just stuck. He cannot get anything in the United States. He doesn't have work authorization. He's just basically underground. So I don't recommend it. I mean, if you're in this presentation, I would suggest, I would guess you're probably very smart and motivated, and you probably don't need to do something like this. How long does the parent company have to be in operation before an L1 visa is feasible? You know, that's a really good question. There's nothing under the law. I mean, at least 1 year, obviously, but you want to show that it's viable. It's got money, it's got employees. So it is possible that you're a company that's been around for 2 years and you've got 40 employees and, several $1 million in the bank, and you want to grow into the US. It's possible. But I think you've got to be a company that needs to expand in the US. And the way the government is going to look to see that is, well, how many people do you have in your home country? How much profits do you have? What's the product? What's the business plan? Why are you trying to come to the US? So that's, we have to look at all the factors to figure out to see how long whether the company is strong enough to justify an international presence. Okay, I think I got everyone. There was one, I think this question has been answered, but do employers still have to show that there are no viable US applicants before recruiting a foreign national? I think I answered that question already. But no, they do not. Not for the temporary visas, only for the permanent residence process. I think I got them. Sorry guys, just 1 second. Oh, we're at 2 o'clock. I am gonna have to wrap up. Oh, this is a really good question. Can someone study part-time or executive MBA or similar while in L1 or H1B? Absolutely. I'm based in Ireland and had some phone interviews with recruiters from Google and Facebook in California. They are interested, but without a visa, it was difficult to move forward. Yeah. Is it a reasonable strategy to work in Europe? Yes, for a US company and get a transfer after 1 year and being open about that from the beginning? Oh yeah, that's a very good plan. Good strategy. And they're not going to be surprised if you say that. Google, Facebook, they have offices in Ireland and all over Europe. And yeah, you could work there with them for a year or more. You can have them sponsoring you for the lottery every year until you get selected. But yeah, once you're in, I think that's the key, right? Getting in, and then the transfers to the US, that can fall into place. So can someone on H-1B sponsored by the full-time employer work part-time for a different employer? Yes. What kind of process paperwork might be necessary? A full petition. They have to file an H-1B petition saying that, so it has to meet all the requirements, that it's a position that requires a special, a degree in a specific field, the prevailing wage, all of that needs to be filed and approved for you to work. Is there any chance for a German business analyst? You guys, and I'm sorry, it's 2 o'clock. And so we're probably going to have to wrap up very soon. The questions keep coming. But is there any chance for a German business analyst to get a visa in US, or are these visas only for engineers and investors? No, I mean, if we're talking about an H-1B, no, definitely I've done H-1Bs for a business analyst. We just have to make sure you have a degree. So yes, there's a chance to get a visa. You just need to be sponsored. What is the best option for me? I would like to open a civil engineering surveying firm. Great. I'm resident in Bahamas. I'm an adjunct professor at local university. What is your country of citizenship? I also want to start up a tech company. What are my best options? So for Thomas, I don't know what your country of citizenship is. We'd have to see. It says I'm a resident in Bahamas, but are you from Bahamas? We would have to see if you're okay, so we'd have to see if the Bahamas has a treaty with the United States, because you could maybe do a, let's see. Sorry about that. I'm trying to look up if we have a treaty with the Bahamas, and that might be a great, that is an exact, that is, just give me 1 second. Bear with me. You'd be shocked how slow the State Department website is. And so I'm just looking on the State Department's website. Oh, no, Bahamas is not a treaty country. So then what I would recommend is maybe an O1, but you need to raise money for your firm. The other option is to maybe see if you can find someone in the US with whom you could create a civil engineering okay. Let's see here. Yeah. Why don't we, I think, Thomas, I think an O1 might be possible, but you have to raise money because you need someone to employ you. The other option is to find someone in the US with whom you could launch the company, and then perhaps they can sponsor you for the H-1B lottery. It wouldn't be your own company, but definitely, you could, I think that might be an option. You could, yeah, that seems to me one way is to find someone in the US with whom you could found a company, have them sponsor you, but making sure that you're a minority shareholder in the company. But you need to show money. This is the US, money talks. So if you need to show funding to pay you, a business plan. So these are really good ideas and good aspirations. But I think, there's definitely quite a bit to get done before a civil engineering surveying firm can be launched, tech companies. So I think it may be worthwhile to schedule a consultation, and we can drill down into your specifics and come up with a real action plan for you on what would need to get accomplished in order to make these goals a reality. Okay, so on that note, I'm going to let you guys go, and we will definitely continue to, Rob and I, like I've said, we've been doing these for 7 years. I've met tons of wonderful people, really enjoy talking to you guys, and just, I can feel your enthusiasm and just I'm always inspired by your goals. So please stay in touch, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll get your email addresses, send out the slides, and we'll see you next time. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.